Just one kiss, the millionaire begged, never knowing that it would heal his broken heart. Hello everyone. Before we begin, if these stories bring you a little peace, a quiet tear, or a smile that stays until midnight, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It's free and only takes a second of your time, but it helps this little channel grow so we can keep sharing moments that remind us what love is truly about. And tell us where you're watching from. Your words make this world feel a little warmer, a little kinder. Thank you for being here. Sometimes, love doesn't return with fireworks. It comes quietly, through the cracks of a broken soul, waiting to be seen again. Let us return to our main character. Rain whispered against the glass walls of the penthouse, a steady rhythm above Manhattan's midnight hum. Inside, Daniel Cole sat alone in a sea of silence that even the city lights could not pierce. The room was cold, deliberate like the man who owned it. He stared at the reflection of himself in the window. 42 years old, founder of one of the world's largest medical tech companies, a man who could mend others, but not himself. On the coffee table rested a glass of whiskey, untouched. Its amber glow flickered beneath the chandelier, beside a small wooden box, aged, scarred, and familiar. He reached for it, but his hand stopped halfway. Inside that box lay 2 wedding rings, dulled by time, and a letter he had written 3 years ago but never sent. "I'm sorry," the first line read, but there were no more words after that. There never were. That night the rain, the crash, the silence that followed had carved a hole in him so deep that even success could not fill it. He blamed himself, and in some ways, he was right. He had been driving. She had been laughing beside him, and in 1 second, laughter became screams. Since then, Daniel Cole had learned to live with ghosts. He built empires, launched innovations, saved lives, but never once allowed anyone close enough to save him. He leaned back in his chair, eyes heavy. The news anchor's voice filled the air. Cole Biotech continues its climb in the global market. He muted the screen. The sound of his own breath felt louder. A thunderclap rolled across the sky, and something in him stirred an ache he refused to name. He opened the wooden box at last. The rings glimmered faintly under the pale light, their edges worn. He touched the letter again. The paper was soft, almost fragile, like the words he could never say. His thumb brushed across the inked promise at the bottom 3 words he had written that night before the crash. "Never again, Daniel." His reflection in the window looked back, older, lonelier, unflinching. "Never again," he repeated under his breath. Not to love, not to trust, not to feel. The rain grew heavier, tracing rivers down the glass as if the city itself were mourning with him. He closed the box, set it back on the table, and exhaled a hollow laugh. "Work," he murmured, as if the word could save him. The computer screen flickered to life, blue light cutting through the dark. Another report, another distraction. Outside, lightning fractured the sky brief, brilliant, gone. Inside, Daniel Cole returned to his quiet vow, the kind that sounded less like strength and more like surrender. He had no idea that somewhere beyond this night, beyond the glass and the grief, someone would touch his world and teach him how to breathe again. Boston smelled like rain and antiseptic that morning. The rehabilitation center stood like a glass cathedral, bright and quiet, where pain came to learn how to breathe again. Elena Brooks tied her hair back, slid on her white coat, and glanced at the empty hallway reflected in the polished floor. Mornings always began this way, clean, steady, deceptively peaceful. But inside her chest, something still ached. 3 years had passed since her brother's heart failed in her arms. She had promised that day she would never let another life slip away without trying to touch it gently, bravely, humanly. She became a therapist not to fix bodies, but to remind people that healing could be soft. That touch, when offered with kindness, could sometimes reach places medicine never could. "Next patient." A nurse called, handing her a file. Elena nodded, flipping the cover open. Daniel Cole. She blinked. The name was impossible to miss, the billionaire who revolutionized medical technology, who built machines that sustained others while his own soul quietly starved. There was something tragic about that kind of irony. When he entered the room, the air shifted. He wore a dark sweater, sleeves pushed to the elbows, posture perfect, expression unreadable. His eyes, cold steel blue, scanned the space as though measuring it. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, offering her hand. "I'm Elena Brooks. I'll be handling your rehabilitation." He gave a short nod. "Just Daniel. My assistant says you're the best." Her tone was even. "I'm not sure about the best. I just don't quit easily." For a second, something flickered behind his gaze, maybe amusement, maybe exhaustion. He sat down. And she noticed how he kept his shoulders square, his jaw tight, like a man holding himself together by sheer will. "Your file says shoulder trauma from a sports accident," she began. He nodded once. "Tennis. I overextended. The irony's not lost on me. A man who designs machines to prevent pain can't even lift his arm without feeling it." She smiled faintly. "The body often tells the truth before the heart does." He looked at her then, a little too long, a little too carefully. "You think this is about emotion?" "Everything is, eventually," she said. They began the session. Her voice stayed calm, guiding him through slow stretches. He obeyed each instruction precisely, mechanically, as though precision could protect him. But when she pressed lightly against the tense muscle near his shoulder, she felt something else beneath the skin, a tremor. Faint but real, like sorrow turned physical. When it ended, Daniel rolled his shoulder once. "How bad is it?" She met his eyes. "Not unfixable, but it's been locked for a long time." He gave a dry laugh. "You make it sound poetic." She turned back to her clipboard, hesitated, then wrote a line beneath her notes. "Severe emotional stiffness." "Oh." He caught her writing and raised an eyebrow. "Is that an official diagnosis?" "Not yet," she said, smiling gently, "but maybe it should be." He studied her for a beat, the first hint of warmth softening his voice. "You don't smile much for someone who heals people. You don't talk much for someone who could build anything," she replied. He looked at her, really looked, and for a fleeting moment, his shoulders lowered, the air between them lighter. When he left, Elena watched the door close and whispered to herself, almost as if afraid to believe it. "Severe emotional stiffness," she repeated. Maybe she wasn't just treating his pain. Maybe she was meeting someone who had forgotten what it felt like to be touched by grace. The next few sessions unfolded in near silence. Daniel Cole was a man of few words, and even fewer expressions. He arrived on time, nodded politely, and sat where she pointed, precise, composed, unshakably distant. Elena didn't try to break that silence. She worked around it, like sunlight seeping through a closed curtain. Her hands moved gently along his shoulder as she spoke, not about his body, but about little things, the weather, a bakery across the street, her favorite scent of lavender. He listened, eyes forward, jaw still locked. But sometimes, she thought she saw a flicker, the brief softening of a gaze, a breath he didn't know he was holding. One afternoon, the light hit the glass wall just right, warm, golden, wrapping the sterile room in something almost kind. She placed a small cloth under his arm to steady his movement. "Relax," she murmured. "You're fighting yourself." He gave a faint, almost amused snort. "It's what I do best." Elena smiled, though her eyes stayed on his shoulder. "Do you know what lavender does to the soil it grows in?" He glanced at her, curious despite himself. "You mean the flower?" "Yes," she said softly. "It thrives where the ground is dry. It doesn't ask for much, just light. And when it blooms, it leaves the soil better than before." He was quiet for a moment. "Then maybe I'm that soil." She met his eyes, calm, unwavering. "Then maybe I'm here to make it rain." Something shifted. It wasn't grand or cinematic, just a breath, shared and understood. For the first time, Daniel looked at her not as his therapist, but as someone who dared to speak softly into his ruins. The following sessions felt different. He began to ask questions, simple ones, like, "Do you always play that piano track?" Or, "Why lavender?" She answered honestly, "Because it reminds me that beauty can come from places that once broke." She caught him smiling once, a quiet, crooked smile that seemed foreign on his face. "You really believe that, don't you?" "Every day," she said. "Otherwise, what's the point of healing?" As the session ended, Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a small paper sachet. Inside was a sprig of dried lavender, its color faint but still alive. "For you," she said, handing it to him. He turned it over in his hand, studying its faded hue, the scent still clinging faintly to it. "What's this for?" It's for hope, she said, because even when it's dry, it still smells sweet. He didn't reply. But as she packed her things, Daniel tucked the lavender into his coat pocket slow, deliberate, almost reverent. When he left, the faint scent lingered in the air long after he was gone. And for the first time in years, Elena thought she could feel it, that a wall inside him had cracked, just enough for light to find its way in. The city outside was a silver blur that night, quiet, half asleep. Boston had lost power for the first time in years, and the rehabilitation center, normally buzzing with soft machinery, stood in perfect stillness. Daniel Cole pushed the door open to find the room lit only by the moon. The monitors were off, the air softer somehow. And there by the window, Elena sat with her knees drawn up, her white coat draped loosely around her shoulders. The moonlight poured over her hair like water, glinting on her hands, the same hands that had steadied his pain 100 times, and still trembled faintly when they rested now. For a moment, he didn't say a word, he just looked. At the curve of her face, the calm in her breathing, the quiet strength that filled the space between them. "I didn't think anyone would still be here," he said finally. She turned slightly, smiling in the dark. "I don't like leaving people halfway healed." "Oh." Her voice carried that same softness he'd come to recognize, gentle, almost stubbornly kind. He took a step closer, the sound of his shoes dull against the marble floor. "I forgot what peace looks like, until now." The words left him before he could stop them. Elena's gaze met his. The silence stretched, but it wasn't awkward. It was alive. She rose slowly, crossing the room until only a few inches separated them. The scent of lavender followed her, faint, familiar. Her hand lifted, hesitant at first, then certain, resting lightly on his forearm. It wasn't part of the session. It wasn't professional. It was simply human. He looked down at her hand, at the way her fingers barely pressed against his skin, not to test, not to treat, but to reach. Something inside him stirred a pulse, small and aching, like remembering how to breathe after holding it too long. He placed his hand over hers. The movement was clumsy, almost startled. His palm was warm, his breath unsteady. Not from pain, but from the sudden, terrifying realization that he could still feel. Neither of them spoke. The moonlight was enough. The silence said everything. Then, from somewhere near her phone on the desk, a melody began, soft, trembling, old as memory. "Moon River." Elena's lips parted in a faint laugh. "It's my brother's favorite," she whispered. "He used to play it when he couldn't sleep." Daniel's chest tightened. That song he remembered hearing it once, years ago, in the car before the crash. His wife had been humming it. He hadn't heard it since. And now, somehow, the same song drifted through the dark, carried by the same kind of gentleness. It didn't haunt him this time. It healed. He exhaled slowly. "I thought that song was gone for me." Elena looked up, eyes glimmering. Maybe it found its way back. He smiled, small, unguarded, real. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He squeezed her hand. It wasn't a gesture of gratitude. It wasn't about recovery. It was the kind of touch that asked, "Is this allowed? Can I still have this?" And the way she didn't pull back was all the answer he needed. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the skyline. The first drops of rain brushed against the glass, soft, hesitant. Daniel glanced at it, then back at her. "Looks like you kept your promise." She tilted her head. "What promise?" "To make it rain." Her laugh was quiet, almost a breath. But beneath it was something deeper, the sound of two hearts learning, tentatively, how to live again. And as the rain began to fall harder, washing the city in silver, Daniel realized something simple, something final. He had spent years mastering control. But in this moment, under the hum of Moon River, for the first time, he let himself simply be. The rain had cleared that morning, leaving the windows streaked with silver light. Inside the therapy room, everything was still: the quiet hum of the heater, the faint scent of antiseptic, the soft ticking of the wall clock marking the end of something that had lasted longer than either of them expected. Daniel sat on the table, rolling his shoulder easily for the first time in months. Elena watched the motion, hands folded loosely in front of her, trying to ignore the strange ache in her chest. "Your body's healed, Mr. Cole," she said finally, keeping her tone calm, professional. "That's all I came for." He looked up, and the formality in her words landed between them like a closed door. His voice came quiet, steady, but there was something raw beneath it. Then, may I ask for one thing? Her eyes lifted. What is it? He held her gaze. Just one kiss. The words weren't heavy. They weren't calculated. They simply hung there, trembling in the air, a request made not from desire, but from gratitude, from something deeper that neither could name. Elena's breath caught. She tried to find something to say to remind him of boundaries, of ethics, of all the rules that had kept them safe from the truth blooming silently between them. But the words wouldn't come. He took a step closer, close enough for her to see the faint lines around his eyes, the exhaustion, the quiet courage it took for him to ask. "This isn't a game," he murmured. "I just want to remember what warmth feels like, without the weight of guilt." Her throat tightened. "And if it changes things?" He shook his head. "It already has." Silence settled again, gentle, forgiving. The air between them thinned until she could feel his breath brushing against hers, uncertain and real. And then she leaned forward, just enough to close the distance. The kiss was not what she expected. It wasn't hungry or desperate. It was soft, trembling, almost sacred. A prayer whispered through skin. His hand brushed her cheek. Hers rested against his chest, feeling the slow, startled rhythm of a heart, remembering how to beat for something other than survival. When they parted, the world seemed quieter. Neither spoke for several seconds. They just stood there, suspended in that fragile stillness that only exists when two lives shift at once. Elena smiled faintly, her eyes wet, though she didn't know why. "That wasn't part of your therapy," she said. He answered, voice low. "No, but maybe it was part of my healing." Behind them, the soft lavender tones of the room seemed to glow. On the far wall hung a new painting, one she had hung only yesterday. A field of lavender beneath a pale sky, endless and alive. The color reflected faintly on their faces, tinting the air with warmth. Daniel turned to look at it, then back at her. "Is that your work?" She nodded. "A friend painted it for me. She said lavender means hope that still smells sweet." He smiled, that quiet, unfamiliar curve of lips that felt almost shy. "Then maybe I'll keep that hope too." Elena blinked, as if trying to steady the moment. "Our sessions are finished, Daniel." He nodded slowly. "I know." She hesitated. "You'll be fine." His answer came softly. "Not if fine means forgetting this." He reached for his jacket, the lavender sprig she'd given him still tucked into its inner pocket. For a long moment, he looked at her, memorizing her face, the way someone memorizes a map before stepping into unknown country. And then, without another word, he turned and left the room quietly, almost reverently. When the door clicked shut, Elena stood still, the echo of his warmth still lingering on her lips. She looked toward the lavender painting, her reflection faint in the glass. Her fingers brushed her own mouth, and she whispered, half to herself, half to the empty room, "Just one kiss." And in that whisper, something inside her bloomed. A reminder that even in the quietest goodbyes, love sometimes leaves behind the scent of hope. That night, the city slept beneath a soft drizzle, the kind of rain that never truly ends, just turns quieter until it becomes memory. Daniel couldn't sleep. The kiss still lived on his lips, a warmth that refused to fade, as if her presence had been stitched into the rhythm of his breath. He poured himself a glass of water, not whiskey this time, and stood before the wide glass wall that framed the skyline. Boston glittered faintly beneath the clouds, lights trembling like they, too, were remembering something tender. He thought of her, of the lavender on her desk, of the way she never hurried her words, as if time itself slowed down to listen. He wondered if she was awake, somewhere across the city, thinking of the same silence that now wrapped around him like a second skin. In her small apartment, Elena sat by the window, fingers tracing the edge of her phone. She had not planned to stay up, yet her mind replayed every breath, every heartbeat from that moment, the look in his eyes before he leaned closer, the fear and hope that collided in that single touch. It wasn't about passion. It was something else, something purer, heavier, a healing that hurt just enough to make them feel alive. She closed her eyes and whispered into the darkness. Some pain doesn't vanish, it just finds another form, softer, kinder. Then she folded the note she had written hours earlier, leaving it atop his file, the one she knew he'd eventually come to collect. By morning, she was gone. The hospital administrator said she'd been called away for a special rehabilitation program, upstate urgent, indefinite. No one knew when she'd return. Daniel found the note later that day. Her handwriting was small, deliberate, the same steadiness she had in every touch. He read the words again and again, until they blurred. Some pain doesn't vanish, it just finds another form, softer, kinder. He didn't call, didn't chase. For the first time in his life, he let something leave without trying to control it. That evening, when he returned to the penthouse, the air felt different, lighter. Still lonely, but no longer hollow. He walked to the wooden box that had sat unopened for years. It was the same one that held his wife's wedding ring, the unsent letter of apology, the weight of everything he couldn't undo. He hesitated, fingers trembling slightly as he lifted the lid. Inside, the letter was gone. In its place lay a single lavender sprig, dry, fragile, but still fragrant. He stared at it for a long time. Then, without quite realizing it, he smiled. Not the smile of victory or relief, but of recognition, the kind that says, "Asterisk, I see what you've done for me, even from afar. Asterisk," he whispered. "You replaced my ghosts with something gentler." The room felt warmer than before. The rain outside softened against the glass, like a lullaby. He sat down beside the open box and ran his thumb over the lavender stem, careful not to crush it. Her scent lingered faintly, merging with the wood, the night, the quiet hum of the city. And in that silence, Daniel finally understood. The kiss had not been a temptation, nor a farewell. It had been a beginning, a pulse of light breaking through years of self-punishment. He exhaled deeply, the way a man does when he's survived his own darkness. Then he closed the box again, not to bury it this time, but to protect what it now held. A reminder that even broken hearts, when touched with gentleness, can choose to keep beating. For weeks, Daniel tried to reason with himself the way a man trained to control every outcome always did. He told himself it was a moment, just one kiss, one spark, one slip of emotion he could file away like an old memory. But emotion, once awakened, had its own quiet intelligence. It found the cracks in his walls and slipped through. He tried to drown it in work meetings, screens, numbers, empty dinners. But between every pause, between every breath, she appeared. Elena's laughter in the hum of an elevator, her hands in the steam of his morning coffee, the scent of lavender every time rain touched concrete. He couldn't explain it, nor could he silence it. Logic failed him in a way pain never had. At night, he walked the penthouse halls like a ghost pacing through his own absence. The city stretched endlessly below thousands of lights, but not one that could make him feel less alone. That kiss, soft and unassuming, had planted something deep within him. It wasn't fire. It was life, small, tender, terrifyingly alive. But with that life came restlessness. The awareness that survival was no longer enough. He wanted to live fully, recklessly, like someone who had something to lose again. One gray morning, he stopped pretending. He closed his laptop mid-meeting, ignored the startled faces on screen, and stood up. For the first time in years, he listened not to reason, but to his heartbeat. By noon, the city was behind him. The road curved toward the quiet hills outside Boston, lined with pines and the faint smell of rain. And somewhere along that road, he stopped thinking entirely. When he arrived, the hospital was smaller than he imagined, pale walls, ivy curling along brick, wind chimes whispering from open windows. Inside, nurses moved softly between patients, the air heavy with calm. He found her in the courtyard, kneeling beside a small boy, teaching him how to stretch his arm. The light fell gently across her face, and for a second, he couldn't breathe. It wasn't beauty that stopped him, it was the peace she carried, the kind he'd been chasing his entire life. When she finally noticed him, her hands froze mid-motion. "Mr. Cole?" she said, standing slowly. He nodded, voice lower than he intended. "You said you heal people, but you left me half done." "I'll know." She looked at him for a long moment, the corner of her mouth lifting into a faint, almost sad smile. "Because healing doesn't finish when someone else says it's time," she said. Her tone softened. "It happens only when you stay still long enough to feel it." He took a small step forward, his words barely a whisper. "I've been still, and it hurt more than I expected." Something flickered in her eyes, recognition, longing, and fear, all at once. "Elena," he said, his voice unsteady. "I came because—" She cut him off, shaking her head slightly. "No, Daniel. You came because you're confused. People mistake gratitude for love. All the time. He flinched. That's not what this is. Then what is it? She asked softly, searching his face. You think one kiss can rebuild a heart that's been broken for years? He hesitated, then stepped closer until their breaths mingled. No, he said. But it reminded me that mine was still beating. She looked away, her composure trembling. You're still healing. Don't make me the cure. You'll hate me for it later. He shook his head. I don't want a cure. I want what's real. And the only time I felt real since that night was with you. Her eyes glistened, the kind of shine that came before tears. Daniel, if this isn't love, it could destroy you again. He smiled faintly, his tone gentle. And if it is? The silence between them stretched long, tender, unbearable. The wind moved through the courtyard, carrying the faint scent of lavender from the garden nearby. Finally, she sighed, as if surrendering to something she'd tried too long to deny. Then let's not call it love yet, she said quietly. Let's just call it beginning again. He reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away this time. Their fingers intertwined, not as promise, not as salvation, but as proof that two people who had once feared touch could still choose to reach out. And in that fragile golden stillness, Daniel Cole, the man who once swore never again, realized that healing had never been about forgetting the pain. It had always been about finding someone brave enough to touch the scar. The evening unfurled like a dream's soft light spilling across the rooftop, painting the air with gold and lavender. The hum of the hospital faded to a hush, leaving only the sound of wind and the distant song of the city. Daniel stood beside Elena, his heart unsteady in its own chest. The scent of antiseptic and rain mingled faintly with lavender. Her lavender and something inside him loosened, as if finally exhaling after years of holding on. He looked at her, really looked the way the light kissed the curve of her cheek, how her hair fluttered gently in the breeze. And for a moment, everything in him stilled. I begged for just one kiss, he said quietly, his voice trembling under the weight of the truth. But it gave me back everything I thought I'd lost. Elena turned to face him fully. Her eyes shimmered with something unspoken. Compassion, wonder, a fear she didn't want to admit. She lifted her hand, fingertips tracing the edge of his jaw, feeling the faint roughness of his skin, the heat beneath. And I never thought healing could look like this, she whispered. He covered her hand with his thumb brushing across her wrist slow, reverent, as if memorizing a pulse that had become his anchor. The world seemed to narrow to the space between them, where breath and silence touched. Elena, he murmured, every time I close my eyes I see that night, and I feel alive again. She smiled faintly, shaking her head. Then don't close them. For a long moment, neither moved. Their eyes held blue against gold, history against hope, and then he stepped closer. The air shifted, heavy and warm, as if even the light paused to listen. His hand slid to the back of her neck, the touch deliberate, trembling with restraint. Her breath hitched, but she didn't pull away. Her fingers found the front of his shirt, clutching lightly, as if afraid that if she let go, the spell would break. When their lips met, it wasn't a question, it was recognition. The first touch was featherlight, uncertain, as if both were learning the shape of something sacred. Then the kiss deepened, slow, tender, desperate in its gentleness. He tasted rain and salt and the faint sweetness of her breath. She melted into him, her palms resting against his chest, feeling the heartbeat that once refused to race for anyone. He tilted his head slightly, drawing her closer, deepening the kiss until it wasn't about desire, but about belonging. The world around them disappeared, no rooftop, no city, no past. Only warmth, breath, and the small, fragile sounds of two people remembering how to feel. When they finally broke apart, their lips still brushed, unwilling to part completely. Her breath came uneven, her eyes glossy with emotion. Daniel, she whispered, it feels like too much. He smiled softly, his forehead resting against hers. It's everything I didn't know I could survive. Done. She closed her eyes, her lips trembling against his again. One more fleeting kiss that felt like a promise not of forever, but of presence. As the sun disappeared beyond the edge of the city, he pulled her into his arms. Her head rested beneath his chin. His hands held her as if she were something both fragile and inevitable. Above them, the sky turned violet. Below, life went on. But on that rooftop, time surrendered and love, in its quiet, aching way, finally began to breathe again. A year later, the morning light spilled through the tall glass windows of Lavender Hope, soft and golden like a quiet promise kept. The sign outside glowed in the early sun, where healing finds home. Inside, laughter and soft voices mingled with the scent of lavender. Elena walked slowly through the new therapy wing, one hand resting gently over the curve of her belly, still small but unmistakable. She smiled at the patients as they passed, her other hand brushing the pendant on her neck, a delicate silver charm shaped like a lavender sprig. Daniel stood near the window, watching her with that familiar, peaceful smile. He wore no tie today, only a pale shirt and the kind of ease that comes when a man has stopped running from his own heart. On his hand, a simple gold ring caught the morning light, quiet proof that love didn't need to shout to be real. When she reached him, he held out a small photograph, the two of them on the rooftop a year ago, framed in the same sunlight that now filled this room. In the corner, her handwriting read, "Just one kiss can change everything." She looked up at him, eyes soft and luminous. "You still carry this?" "I carry everything," he said, "especially you." Their hands found each other, hers over his, both resting on the gentle rise of new life between them. Moon River played faintly in the background as the ribbon was cut, the center filled with warmth and movement, voices and light healing finding its way into every corner. On the wall behind them, a framed quote gleamed in silver ink. He asked for a kiss, and found the heartbeat he'd been missing. Because sometimes, love doesn't rescue, it restores. By the window, a lavender stem bloomed in a glass jar, violet petals trembling as if breathing. Some loves don't return to the past, they bloom where the heart dares to begin again. If this story touched your heart, stay with us for more tales where power learns to love again. Subscribe to Valen Stories, and keep believing in the kind of love that heals. The faint sound of laughter lingered hers, his, and something new, small and tender, waiting to arrive. And with that, the story ended not with a farewell, but with a heartbeat, the truest kind of beginning.